PMs are starting to code, engineers are starting to do product, the roles are blending. Everyone knows that. And it's true. But I don't think that's the real story. I think the real story is that AI is collapsing role boundaries faster than people can develop the judgment those boundaries used to enforce. That's the shift. Because for a long time, the wall between product and engineering was just not about job titles, it wasn't about org charts, it wasn't about tradition. It was about cost. Building was expensive. If you wanted software made, you needed engineers. And because engineering was expensive, product managers had to get good at framing, prioritizing, clarifying, deciding what mattered before something got built. And engineers, because they lived inside the implementation, had to get good at systems thinking, trade-offs, architecture, reliability, all the invisible stuff underneath the product. That separation wasn't perfect, but it forced each side to develop a kind of judgment. And AI is weakening that structure very, very quickly. Now PMs can build things directly, and engineers can go from idea to product without nearly as much friction. This sounds empowering. It's almost intoxicating. It's like a dopamine hit. But it also creates a new kind of danger because people can now operate outside their trained judgment zone long before they've developed the instincts to do it well. And I think that's what a lot of people are feeling right now, even if they don't have the language for it yet. In the old model, the division of labor was costly, but it was also educational. If you were a PM and you brought an idea to an engineer, you got friction back, sometimes a lot of friction. You'd say this seems simple, and engineering would say, no, it's not. And sometimes that was annoying. Sometimes they were overly cautious. Sometimes the process was too heavy. But sometimes that friction was teaching you something real. It was teaching you that a clean idea on the surface can hide messy reality underneath. State dependencies, edge cases, data models, all the things that don't show up in a mock-up or a spec. That friction taught humility. On the other side, if you were an engineer and you had a clever solution or a product idea, you usually just couldn't disappear and ship the whole thing on your own, especially inside of a big company. You had to go through design, research, product review, stakeholder alignment, prioritization. And yes, that could be slow and frustrating and political, but it forced contact with ambiguity. It forced you to answer questions like, is this actually a user problem? Is this the right problem? Is this worth doing now? Does anyone besides me care about it? That friction taught judgment too. In the old world, both sides were constrained in ways that were sometimes painful, but oftentimes useful. Now a lot of that friction is disappearing. And when friction disappears, you just don't move faster. You also lose some of the mechanisms that used to teach you how to think. I think this is where the conversation often misses the point. People say AI makes everyone more technical, or AI lets non-engineers build, or they say engineering is becoming commoditized. There's some truth to all of that, of course. But the deeper thing AI changes is this. It makes execution cheap. And when execution gets cheap, the scarce resource changes. The scarce resource is no longer just the ability to produce output. The scarce resource becomes judgment. Judgment about what to build, judgment about how it should be built, judgment about which problems are real and which are noise, judgment about what looks done but is actually fragile, judgment about what feels impressive but is actually unnecessary. That's the new bottleneck, not raw production, judgment. And the tricky part is that AI gives people leverage before it gives them a taste of that judgment. It gives them the capability before it gives them the calibration. That's why this moment is so psychologically dangerous, because people can produce something that looks credible before they understand whether it's robust, necessary, coherent, or even solving the right problem. And once that happens, false confidence kicks in. Now let's talk about how this shows up on each side. If you're a PM, this is probably the most exciting moment you've ever had in terms of leverage. For years, you have been the person with the idea, the user insight, the strategy, the framing, but you still depended on somebody else to make the real product. Now you can open the AI coding tool, Codex or Gemini or Claude Code, Lovable, Cursor, describe what you want, and get surprisingly far. You can build a prototype, you can connect an API, you can spin up a workflow, you can create a small app, you can even launch something that users can touch. That's a huge shift. And honestly, it's awesome. It's amazing. But here's the trap. Working software is not the same thing as understood software. That distinction matters a lot because if you're a PM, AI can help you build past your actual understanding faster than you can realize. Let's say you build a lightweight journaling app. First version works. You log in, you can store entries, you can summarize them in AI, you can tag them, search them, maybe add a reflection feature. And now you're thinking, this is amazing. I can do this. And you can, but then you keep going. You add settings and then syncing and then profiles and then maybe some prompt customization. And now weird things start happening. Something updates in one place and breaks in another. Your data model starts getting muddy. What is a data model? A fix solves one issue but creates two more. The code technically runs, but you no longer have a clean mental model of why it runs. So what do? You patch it, then you patch it again. Then eventually you rewrite part of it, and then something else becomes unstable. This is where a lot of AI products start to quietly decay, not because the person building them is unintelligent, not because PMs can't learn how to think like an engineer, but because AI makes it very easy to keep moving after you've crossed the boundary of your real system understanding, and that's the danger. The danger is not building. The danger is building past your judgment. And because the output looks real, you don't always notice the moment you cross that line. Now let's flip it. If you're an engineer, this AI moment probably feels different. In many ways, you've been preparing for it for years. You're already thinking systems. You know how software behaves. You understand structure, separation of concerns, failure models, technical debt, and all the invisible forces that can determine whether something can actually survive contact with reality. But at some level, you're also worried about your job fundamentally because the market is changing so rapidly. And do I need to think more like a product manager and less like an engineer, or some combination of the both? So when you use AI, you're often not just accepting what it gives you, you're directing it. You can tell when the structure is wrong, you can spot brittle logic, you can repair bad outputs. You can use AI as acceleration instead of substitution, and that is a real advantage. But engineers have a trap too, because now execution is so cheap that you can move from idea to implementation before you've really earned conviction about the problem itself. It used to be harder. You needed buy-in, more process, more translation between idea and execution. And now you can start just building. And that sounds great until you realize what that friction used to do. It used to force contact with ambiguity. And now you can skip through all of that contact. So the engineer failure mode is usually not poor implementation. It's false certainty about what deserves implementation. You build a system that is elegant, scalable, modular, and technically impressive, but it solves the wrong problem. Or it solves the right problem at the wrong level of complexity. Or it solves a problem that only makes sense to someone who enjoys building systems. And that happens all the time. You've probably felt it on some of your side projects in the past. I know I have. An engineer will build an incredibly capable tool with plugins, workflow logic settings, extensibility, automation hooks, maybe some beautiful internal architecture. But the user actually needs something much narrower, something much simpler, less powerful and more obvious. Or maybe the engineer built something they personally would use and confused that with a product validation. That's a judgment failure. Again, the issue is not that the engineers should not do product thinking. It's that AI makes it easier to skip the messy learning loop that product judgment usually requires. What makes this moment hard to diagnose is that both failure modes look like productivity at first. The PM can point to a working prototype. The engineer can point to a well-built product. And in both cases, there is something real there. That's what makes it deceptive, because the presence of output creates an illusion of comprehension. You start to believe that because something exists, it makes sense. Because something runs, it's sound. Because something is polished, it's valuable. But AI is very good at producing things that cross the threshold of plausibility before they cross the threshold of wisdom. That's why I think one of the biggest hidden risks of this era is the illusion of understanding. In the past, the delay between idea and implementation often exposed what you didn't know. It was also too long in many cases, and it does need to be shortened. But now the model fills in the gaps so quickly that your ignorance can stay hidden longer. And that is dangerous because it suppresses the learning cycle. PMs no longer get slowed down in the exact places that used to teach systems intuition. And engineers no longer get slowed down in the exact places that used to teach product discipline. So yes, AI increases speed, but more importantly, it removes the friction that used to create judgment. This is why I don't think the future is really about PMs versus engineers. And I don't think the winning move is some shallow version of everyone should become a full stack or everyone should be a product-minded builder. It's not wrong. It's just incomplete. The real divide is now between people who use AI to extend their judgment and people who use it to bypass it. That's the line that matters. The people who are going to stand out are not the people who can generate the most. They're the ones who can move fluidly between outcomes, systems, and judgment. They know how to ask, what problem actually matters here? What is the simplest thing that could work? What is fragile underneath all of this? What are we assuming that we haven't validated? Where am I relying on AI in a way that exceeds my own understanding? Now, you don't have to understand it all, but you have to have an understanding of the general framework on which you're building. That is the new skill stack. Not just building faster, thinking better while building faster. And I'm going to release 2 other videos coming up. One that looks at it strictly from a product manager's perspective and gets into how you can think like an engineer. And then I'm going to flip that in another video where the engineer can learn how to think like a product manager. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.